Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We are joined again today by Lacrecia Hill. If you remember, we spoke with her exactly a month ago now. If you haven't watched that conversation, please go check it out. We'll include the link. Today, we are honored to be joined by Natasha Hill, who is her sister and an attorney. And they have both been out there in the community, really walking the walk, talking the talk, doing what they say they should be doing, and actually taking action, and really inspirational. So Lucretia, it's been a month since we spoke. What has happened since we talked to you? Have you seen progress? What are some changes that you've seen in the past month, either good or bad?
I'm actually really excited to say that we have seen positive progress. After weeks of, almost living in, we have a downtown park. It's very close to City Hall. Most of us have been gathering there lately. Our biggest win so far is our city council voted on the contract with the police guild. If you don't know, the police guild is the union that the officers involved in. And so that's their employment contract. Within that employment contract, they were trying to remove oversight. In our county alone, we voted by 75% of a separate board to provide oversight for the police. It's called the Ombudsman Board. Well, they were trying to make it so that oversight wasn't as aggressive, that the union was more involved than it should be. And on a 7-0 vote, our city council voted it down. It's obviously not over, but it was the most calls and letters and information that they had ever gotten about a particular issue. Because we're in a small town, if you don't know, we're probably like the size of Tacoma. So it's easy to get very connected to your city council because we are technically a smaller town, and it made a huge difference. Those phone calls, 30 phone calls, will kind of overflow our city council. And so with that, we had phone banks going on, and it worked. In addition to that, we did a vigil, and I think one of the most powerful things that I experienced were Spokane actually has the 5th most violent police force in the nation.
Wow.
And so we have this thing that's called the ice ribbon. It's in the summer, you can regular skate on it. In the winter, it's an ice rink. Well, it's right across from City Hall. And so we did a vigil where we actually wrote, I think we're up to 42 names of individuals that have been killed by Spokane Police Department. And most of these individuals have been unharmed. Their mental health issues, their domestic violence issues that most people should have walked away from. And I had the opportunity to meet families who have been deep in this struggle. And so, yes, we have had all of that action created a win. And we also have a Think platform that has been developed by a coalition of agencies that are committed to reducing the budget for our police force and reinvesting upstream into education and mental health and domestic violence, and really stopping the issue before it gets to the police force and to police action. So yeah, we've had a small win, and it feels really good.
Yeah, one of the biggest takeaways from our last conversation that you taught me was how important it is to get involved with your local community and your local politics. And I saw that you ladies recently met with a city council member. Tell us about that, and tell us how, Lucretia mentioned last time what we can do to get involved. Maybe Natasha, you have some more input about, because that was new for me. So yes. What can we all do to do the same things in our own respective communities and take action and make changes like you guys are doing in yours?
I think that's a question most people have. It was my question, to be honest. I'm in private practice, so I didn't know how to necessarily get involved. Luckily, I have family and friends here who are more organized with respect to public interest groups that are doing community work and community organizing. And so I think just realizing that you just have to kind of show up and talk to people, and listening to stories and sharing stories. Once you're affected, you can relate to it, it's what motivates you to take action. So calling city council and taking those steps, and showing up at the vigil and wanting it to be visible so that the message gets out there. For me, that was something that I wasn't really, well versed in how to get involved, and was feeling like, I've got this full-time job, I've got my own practice, and I've got kids, and, am I really going to be able to do anything to make a difference? And I just kind of found myself out there initially during the protest, and just wanted to be heard. And then also having the realization that I do have a platform a lot of folks don't have, and that I want to use whatever skill set I have. And we all have a skill set, right? So we all have, I know it's kind of been floating around the internet, we all can be in a different lane and effectuate change. I think finding that lane and that place that you can show up and meet people and talk to people and figure out how to get involved. We've encouraged folks to join the NAACP. We've encouraged folks to get involved with the local LGBTQ community organizations who've been very proactive with respect to the Black Lives Matter movement, where there's lots of room for volunteers, for organizing events, and also getting other people in the community activated, so that there's more of us, so we are more visible and we're more heard. So for me, that was the biggest thing is, how do we get involved? What can we do? And we did have this great opportunity to meet with Councilwoman Betsy Wilkerson, who I think realized from her experience meeting with city officials that there was this this filter or this selection that white people in our community or the city officials only wanted to hear from certain Black leaders that they felt comfortable with. And those folks happen to come from, not to overly generalize or stereotype, from a generation where those who have been able to find some kind of middle class comfort are less inclined to want to make everybody else uncomfortable or to discomfort themselves. And so it has been the youth. I just want to give a huge shout out. And I think Betsy herself even recognizes the youth are a big part of this movement. And while we look youthful, like you ladies look youthful, we're well into our late 30s. This one may be a little older. But when I look at the 20-something-year-olds and I realize how motivated they are in this time to want to participate and make change and be heard, I want to elevate their voices too, because I know when we were that age, we didn't feel like anybody wanted us to be heard, especially on these types of issues. And so they've kind of been a driving force. I think they bridge the gap a lot of times between even my generation and the older generation, the boomer generation, to say, hey, look, we're what you guys are fighting for, and we're well worth it. Because a lot of grandparents, especially in our community, raise their grandkids, so these intergenerational connections that we have now, and where we can look at some of our grandparents and say, yeah, this is their lifetime. Like they've experienced a lot of the segregation that's happened. They went through the civil rights movement, and here we are again. And so I do hope that we can activate this community specifically to get people to be okay with being uncomfortable, realizing that it's only going to push things forward to make changes in our system to eliminate racism. Particularly to eliminate racism, but also to address the inequalities that have resulted because these systems have been in place for so long.
Right. I have noticed that. I'm glad you brought that up. Here in Portland, a lot of the younger, in their 20s, have been out there at the rallies and the protests, and it's really refreshing to see that. Because like you said, my sister is younger and I'm going to be turning 50 next year. I was actually shocked to see that. And it was wonderful to see them participating. And we have a dear friend who she, with COVID, she doesn't want to go out, but she said, this is more important to me than getting sick, so I'm going to participate. And she's 24 years old. And when I heard her say that, it really touched me. I thought that was wonderful, and I'm glad that you touched on that.
And it is our job, we have access. I think forget that we're in an age now in terms of who we are professionally where we do have access. And I've always I tell the young people that I've been working with, like, I am giving you my access and my privilege. You can use it in a way that moves this work forward. And we do need to be the gatekeepers for them and open up that gate and be that voice for people who won't listen to them because they have great ideas. Just the other day I was talking about, we've made so much advancement in technology and science, and we haven't done that for humanity. We have to be as innovative with humanity and good outcomes for people as we are with everything else that generates revenue. So to me, it's so crucial that and as you know, innovation comes from diversity. And so if we can create more diversity amongst those voices, amongst ideas that change policing to community health, I think we can make some serious advances in our own communities and have much happier, healthier homes.
Right.
That's a good point, because even if we call them community health officers as opposed to police, I mean, cops ruined it anyway.
Yeah.
We've got to, look, we've got to reframe this, I think, and it's going to take, it's definitely going to take some more.
Yeah, I think that the youth is a big piece of why this maybe feels different. I think we talked about this last time, and it's something that's come up a lot in conversations is this isn't new. This isn't the first time we've seen police brutality on video. This isn't the first time we've heard someone say, I can't breathe. This has been happening for hundreds of years. So I think people are excited and energized, but also what is different about right now? Mm-hmm. Is it just the convergence of all of these things, Trump being president, people of communities of color are highly, highly impacted by COVID and are, losing their jobs at a higher rate. They don't have access to healthcare. So is it all of these things and just the time that we're in that makes this different? Is it different? Is it a moment? Is it a movement? What do you ladies think about this time and how do we keep this momentum going?
I think it is different. I definitely, and it's technology. Like we have access to information like we have never had before. And these young people are spreading information at a phenomenal rate. I mean, they're able to get information in and out so fast, and they're doing research. I mean, it took a couple conversations for this young group that we've been meeting with to create their own list of, they're like, I scoured all the research articles I found all these people who have been killed by police. I'm like, whoa, it's amazing. I mean, they're and they are comfortable with data. They know data. They've been engaging in, they'll take data from their Facebook page and apply it to conversations. I'm amazed. Just here in Spokane, we just had a huge blow up of individuals who are involved in the entertainment and sound people and musicians who have been violating young women. And within 24 hours, there was a list of 25 men and their companies came out saying, no, this will not be tolerated. I mean, it just amazes me. Even in the LGBTQ community right now, it's happening where there was a particular person who should not have been in a leadership role. And these young people in the court, which is, you get crowned, it's a thing. But they came out with these individuals who were unhealthy to their community, and they had people resigning and a whole, what is it called? They have a petition to get rid of these individuals within 24 hours. It's amazing how quickly and proactive they want to be to change the communities that they have been born into. Wow. And so it's the information, and I think that the COVID, I always say too, it kind of was like a spring, like it drew us in. Mm-hmm. And, we've had a lot of time to think about what kind of world do we really want? What do we really want to get out of the communities that we're in? And so it gave us, a lot of us had this privilege of contemplation. And I think just this combination of things made it right for us to be no more. Some of us, especially white collar workers, have time to engage in these conversations that we haven't had time to engage before. And I think Natasha says it's right, that the young people are very motivated. When they talk to you, they understand these issues and they want something different for themselves. These are the kids who watch their parents lose their houses. Yeah. Well, this is a very special generation.
They're like trapped in this world that they didn't create, and they're wondering what the hell we were all doing to let things get to this point. Yeah. Where literally the economy is just not manageable, right? There is no American dream anymore in terms of one that could even be sold and you could expect people to even buy into. It's just complete, crap at this point. And I think that this is different. And I think it's more revolutionary than just a movement. I think Black Lives Matter, if we think of it like that, where you can create an agenda, where you can get people organized, where you can have a consistent message, that's a movement to me. And I think that there has been this perfect storm with COVID, and it all comes back to what is valued in this country, which is money, it's property. Because once you took away the thing that once the thing was already taken away that could be pulled out from somebody to prevent them from speaking out or protesting, what did you have to control them with? The loss of your livelihood. And I think we talked a bit about this too. It's understandable, at least it's logical, why individual police officers want to protect their job, right? Because it's economic. It's what provides for their family. It's what they know. Starting over is a scary thing. Trust me, I know it. I've done it. And many of us have done it. And so I do think that the economic factor with COVID, removing that dangling carrot that, don't go out and protest, don't get in trouble because you're going to lose everything. The government didn't have that control private employers didn't have that control. And so it gave everybody an opportunity to reevaluate, like you said, and decide, well, how can we use this time that we have? How can we use the space that we have? Because if we are going to re-enter society, maybe we can re-enter to a better society. Maybe we can have more equal pay. Maybe we can have less police brutality. Maybe we can equalize some of the racial injustice in systems. And maybe we can just take some time to acknowledge that we haven't been doing this right. Maybe we can take a step back and learn from some other countries who've existed a lot longer than ours and figure out, well, how do we acknowledge history in order to make sure that the future generations aren't still suffering from the pain and the anguish and the trauma? And I think that that's a big part of what why I see this as revolutionary. There's pent up trauma, and as we know from whether you're talking earthquakes or volcanoes, there has to be a release for this. And we've seen it time and time again in our own history, throughout history in any country. And I just think that this is a moment here that we can't continue to uphold principles in the Constitution when we build systems that specifically prevent us from ever achieving that, and then sell people some dream that's totally unachievable, that's just going to leave you in debt, depressed, potentially suicidal, and then, strung out on the healthcare system, and you can't figure out what the hell you want to do. And for the most part, you just want to stay inside and be as comfortable as you can in your little bubble. That's not living. That's not life. And when we go back to humanity and we go back to biology and we go back to our roots, first of all, we're nomads. We need to be outside. We need to be socializing. But the idea that we should all be organized in the same way with the same belief system or philosophy is counterintuitive, because we're not the same. We're never going to be the same. And we have at least some good ideals and principles which is hard to believe that even got written down by these founding fathers. But at least it gives us something to say, hey, look, we all have some founding principles that we can try to achieve and live up to. So yeah, I think it's a little bit more revolutionary for all those factors.
And I think you two can also understand, like, we're all first generation. We're the first generation in our family to transcend poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And even when you play by the rules, as you two both know, it's still so stacked against you. It's not a bootstrap. It is a claw, fight, scream, and then make sure that you fit into the bubble enough. Are you attractive enough? Are your teeth good? I mean, all these little things that could have set you back, like, genetically, if you had bad teeth and you still go to college and you still try these things, your access is still going to be limited. Like, we know that the way we look, and our personalities and our ability to adjust because of trauma have given us access. And so I think even our generation, we're kind of calling bullshit. Like, we are the generation that you told to go to college and do these things and we'll have this access. And even when we got there, we were like, what access?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I went to a cannabis conference here in Washington, and a man said to me, "You're a Mexican woman CEO. I can't believe that." I was just shocked right there. I didn't know what to say.
Or when they ask you if you're someone's wife.
Who are you here with?
Yeah.
Myself. Well, who are you representing? I'm the CEO of business. It's very, in this day and age, I was shocked to hear that. Yeah, it's shocking. You bring up a really good point about the American dream. We think of the American dream, we think of getting married and having kids. And as you ladies know, I've never been married and I don't have kids, and I don't feel lesser than anybody else. And I feel as a successful human being. So I feel that dream is no longer there. We create our own dream and create our own future. So I really admire you for bringing that up. One of the things that we talked about, Lacrecia, before was growing up in a community and as a Black woman. So Natasha, what are some things that you look back on that maybe some memories that you've had that weren't so good or good?
Yeah, I think growing up in a predominantly white community, definitely, and we grew up with our white family. So when we realized and we had that appreciation, like, oh, we're different, we're Black, it was very, very young. So we always knew. So, growing up in Spokane, it was like we dealt with poverty. I think for me personally, like, that was the great equalizer, because all the people of color in our community kind of had to collaborate for there to even be enough of us to matter. But I felt silenced a lot. I felt like, especially like as a woman, where a lot of times even the people who are trying to help out students of color, especially Black students, they definitely enable a little bit. And so I definitely had experiences where I I wasn't given the credibility I think I deserved because I was a woman, even though they were there to promote minorities and Black students and all of that. I've dealt with that a lot professionally as well. So growing up here, I just was always aware of the fact that, you know, I was Black, that we had younger brothers and sisters who were darker skins. And because we were lighter skin and our hair was less texturized, less curly, more white, we were treated better by our own family than our younger brother and sister. And it was something that we were very protective about, we were very aware of. And so one of the things I think that prompted us to, I think that was one of the things that prompted us to just start reading everything by any Black author about Black people in the library, period. Like, we're obviously missing something, right? Because white people see us differently. So clearly we're different and we need to learn about that. I think through reading and the education part of it, that's how I found out about history and about how white people really are, and why my grandma was the first one to speak out and call a white person racist when they treated us differently than the other white students in our classes, for example. So we had this very keen awareness, and we also grew up in a female-dominated household, so we were able to speak out. And that sometimes got us negative attention and being, you know, stereotyped as the angry Black woman, even as a young girl, or being seen as more aggressive or violent. I definitely had that. I grew up in the 90s, right? So it was like t-shirt and jeans era, baggy clothes. And so I was seen as like a gangster bitch. Like, I was hard, like I wanted to fight, never been in a fight. I had attitude, but I also was emulating, right? So growing up in white culture, like I'm emulating, I'm trying to be cool. Like I want to be hard. Like I want people to know, like, yeah, like I actually like being Black. Like I'm not trying to repress it. I'm not trying to not acknowledge it. And I think that a lot of mixed people in our community, especially here in Washington, I'll say, and I went to school at UW, so I had plenty of time. I met lots of mixed people from across the state, and everybody kind of has those experiences where you start feeling out that Black side of you and kind of feeling your comfort zone and like what it means to be Black, who Black people really are, what is Black culture. And when you've had limited experiences, you start to, you know, play on stereotypes. I did that. It took me meeting, you know, a lot of different people, Black people from different backgrounds. When I went to UW, most of the people I met were middle class. And I think that was another realization, like, oh, the Black people who actually achieve academically are typically middle class. So I didn't relate to them in the same way that I thought I would, just because we shared some Black culture, or we were trying to all experience some, you know, Black culture that maybe we were lacking here in Washington. Excuse me. And so those were kind of some of the experience that shaped me as far as wanting to leave Washington. So I was always grappling with this like whiteness, right? This construct of whiteness, that white people have it easier, have it better, they're preferred, and not feeling, just being really frustrated, feeling sometimes like you were being tokenized, right? So like I was qualified, I worked really, really hard, but I never knew if somebody was going to acknowledge that or just assume I got it because they assumed I come from a privileged Black background, or because I'm attractive, or because my hair wears a certain way. And so all of those things, it's like you're constantly overcompensating to try to feel like you have to prove yourself, which I think goes back to that whole imposter syndrome. So growing up, you feel like an imposter in your own community because you're not like the rest of the white people in your family, right? You grow up feeling like the imposter because you're achieving more than everybody in the poor community at Rogers High School, where nobody's expecting you to necessarily even graduate, let alone go to college. So nobody's nurturing that. You get to college and then you feel like an imposter because you thought Black people, you know, had some commonalities that you could relate to, and you're meeting all kind of different Black people. You're like, this is diverse beyond what I was expecting. Then I get to law school and it's like a foreign language. And I am also feeling that imposter syndrome of, who the hell am I to even be here? I don't have the background. I don't have the
laws that was written about you.
Yeah, in law school, there was a 40-year-old like white man who, actually another mixed student, Black white girl from Spokane, originally from Spokane, just happened. I met her in law school. She went to college down in California. We ended up at the same law school. She actually is the one who uncovered this student in our section. And in law school, they have different sections. So your first year, you're in the same classes with the same cohort of students. And there's like over 100 students in the damn cohort. But I was probably one of like maybe 4 or 5 Black students. I think there was only one Black male, and the rest of us were Black women. And he, in his blog, he wrote, and specifically wrote about me on the day that I was called on in our contracts class. We had a professor who did the Socratic method and grilled you on a case. And I read the case. The case was about, coincidentally, I practice contract law. That's one of the things I do. Didn't know what a contract was at the time or after the first year of contracts in law school. I just was really lost in it. So apparently I didn't have a very good showing that day. But his commentary was about how I didn't represent for my community and just was very disparaging about Black people in general. And it was the first time I realized that I was representing for the Black community. Had I known, maybe I would have put a little bit more effort. I thought I was just there to be Natasha.
Keep in mind, she had just turned 21 when she entered the law school.
I mean, this was,
the month law school started, she turned 21.
And that was another part of it, is the age factor, the woman factor, and then being a Black woman. And I want to point out one more thing as far as like the assumption that because we're Black women, we're strong and we should be able to just take all this burden on and not be affected. And it's just so frustrating that we get put into that box that people have a lot less compassion for you. They just assume like, you know, because if you've been through the trauma, and as a Black woman, the stereotype of being so strong. And that's something that just I recently became aware of was affecting me. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's something that needs to change. Because there's always been, and it plays into the legal field, this protection for white women, right? Because they were always considered a man's property. So, you know, Black women weren't allowed to marry white men. So obviously for till 67, right? So we weren't allowed to have the privileges of being a white man's property and being able to inherit all of his wealth. And so that protection of white women and the fragility of a white woman and the delicacy, or like the sensitivity, right? And just how men in general, and I see this with Black men who treat white women a different way, or even Latin women in a different way, or Asian women a different way than they would treat a Black woman, when it's their own mom that they're using as the example of why Black women don't need that compassion because they're so strong. I don't want my kids to see me that way. I just want them to see me as a person and as a woman, because I don't want that to be reflected on who they choose to be with. And I think the harder you're perceived, like when you're perceived as a hard person, people perceive you literally as hard to love. And going back to your comment, I'm not married. I have 2 children, and I didn't marry their father. I was with him for 15 years. And the perception when I was with him and not being married and having children was like, you know, it looked like I wore the scarlet letter or something, because as a profession, in my profession, especially as an attorney, you know, well, what's wrong with you, or what's wrong with him, right? Because you're not married, but you have children. And even when I didn't have children and I was with him and we weren't married, it just, you know, so living up to these like expectations, and then people putting you in a box and literally like cutting off compassion for who you are. And it's so subconscious that I think that's where I didn't realize it. So I think that the more conversation there is about it, the more education there is about it, and literally portraying Black women as vulnerable, right? And not just strong. Like I saw something today with Sally Hemingway, is that right?
Sally
Hemings with Thomas Jefferson. And it's like the stories they've told about this woman, how they've bastardized her life when she was being assaulted as a child, is fucking disgusting. But to see her as somebody who was like worthy of this white man's rape, you know, and love and birthing his children, and that she somehow isn't respected and her humanity is not being respected. And that really struck a chord with me today. And so I guess that kind of gives you my whole evolution of growing up here in Spokane as a Black woman, and just realizing like, oh my God, all these things really have been going on. And you kind of just want to stay in your bubble and just work and prove yourself. And the overcompensating is so exhausting. It's just so exhausting.
Yeah, I saw recently, I think it was today or yesterday, that there was an article about, you know, a building got burned down somewhere and they were looking for who did it so they could arrest them, but they're still not looking for the people that killed, or not arresting the people that killed Breonna Taylor. And they said, we care more about property than this woman's life, and how ridiculous that is. And just to your point about, you know, they just don't see her as you know, worthy of affection or love or justice. It's just so sad. And we just see it over and over, just like that story you told. I saw that, I think one of Lacrecia might have posted it. So at what point did you realize you wanted to be a lawyer, and has it been what you expected it would be?
I just wanted to get out of Spokane initially. So I went to UW. School was easy. School was just, and I really do, I say that because I know school is not easy for everyone.
We've always said like everyone has to have their hustle. Well,
school was our hustle.
School was our hustle.
Yeah.
That was that was our, you know, I will tell you that the government gets you in three ways. You either join the Army, or you get saddled with debt going to college, or you just get a normal job and hope for the best. And sometimes you make it out and sometimes you don't. But I mean, they get you, or you become incarcerated. I mean, those are kind of our four avenues. And so for us, it was education was our hustle.
Yeah, because I didn't want to work as hard as my grandma. She was a waitress. She cleaned houses. I didn't want to do labor jobs. And I knew that, so I knew education was the right hustle, and it was I could get free money for college, at least initially. But it wasn't until I was at UW and I was a sociology major, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I graduated. I'm like, what the heck am I going to do with a sociology degree? I didn't want to just get a job. And people are like, you can be a social worker. And I realized kind of early on from a lot of the books I read that that's not how it's going to make change. Like I can, you know, I can empathize, and I come from that community, but I don't want to live the trauma of what I'd already grew up. Like that's for somebody else to do. Like that's for privileged people to come down off their high horse and come help people who are less privileged than them. But I don't think it's necessarily healthy for people in trauma to be the only ones with coming back into the community and helping, especially if you haven't healed from that trauma. So for me, it was like social work, sociology, I don't know. And I knew a guy who was planning to go to law school. So I ended up meeting with the head of the sociology department, who told me that he had planned to go to law school, decided not to, and then, you know, went and got his PhD in sociology and became, you know, the head of the sociology department at UW. If I went there, I would probably get paid to go to school because I could work as a TA, essentially get my tuition paid and make money, live on campus, whatever, right? I just didn't want to stay in Washington. I had never met a lawyer, didn't know a lawyer, didn't know what lawyers really did, hadn't had any real experience with the law, other than some shoplifting when I was 14 at Claire's. So I didn't have any reason to become a lawyer other than when the guy was kind of encouraging me to go to get my PhD and not go to law school. He said it was going to be 6 years versus 3 years. And so I just did the math. And I figured, well, 3 years is a whole lot shorter than 6 years. And I would be real candid. Like I had already established that I would never have a job where I have to pee in a cup.
Right.
So I took a law degree. And I realized afterward that, oh, if you work for the government, you might still have to pee in a cup. So then I realized that I would probably not do that either. And private practice would more or less be my thing. I didn't have resources to actually take a prep class for the law school. It's called the LSAT, right? So I didn't have. I took free practice exams that were available at the law school. I practiced with a friend of mine. I was getting similar scores to him. He seemed pretty smart, so I went for it. I tested high enough to get into UW and into Southwestern Law School.
They actually offered her a free ride at UW. She turned it.
Turned it down.
I really wanted to leave Washington because it really was because of white people. Like I really hated living here. On top of the weather in Seattle was kind of like the last push. And I worked with students. I worked with kids all through college and after school programs. So I always wanted to work in my community and work with my community. But it just was that constant dealing with like having to deal with racial issues here in Washington. I figured if you go somewhere more diverse, you're in a bigger market, some of that stuff subsides. I know everywhere is not perfect. Like I wasn't living in Fantasyland, but I knew that I could have a totally different experience if I just got out. So yeah, I absorbed over $50,000 in debt every year that I attended Southwestern Law School. I almost failed out my first year. I was offered an opportunity to go back to UW and I didn't take it because they told me I had to start over and that was going to be 4 years instead of 3.5. So I was still doing the math on the shortest course to get to where I needed to go, to where I could have a job and not pee in a cup. And so I ended up after my first year realizing that one is I couldn't financially afford to be in LA and go to law school. My mom was no longer wanting to be in her profession as a prostitute. So she stopped being a call girl. She stopped wanting to work at the brothels in Vegas. And I didn't have anybody who could help me pay my rent. Didn't feel really good asking your mom to help you pay your rent, knowing the industry that she's in. But that's just how we did things. It's what we knew growing up. We always were hustling. And, she obviously wanted to help. I ended up going in part-time for law school so that I could finish and get a job. And so I did it in 3.5 years, but I really went to law school just with this mentality that I need to get the fuck out of here. This is not a healthy place for me. I'm not happy here. And the reality is once I got into my profession, once I went to law school, I was still one of very few, minorities in school. The my law school was in the middle of Koreatown in downtown Los Angeles, basically about a mile from Staples Center, mostly Koreans and Mexicans. And you've got, 90% white students, some Persians, some Jews, couple Mexicans, a few, I think there was like 2 or 3 natives. And our numbers were just so small. And I realized, like, holy shit, I came out here and put myself back in a microcosm of what I experienced growing up. But in some ways I was very well, I was prepared in that sense. I just wasn't prepared from an educational standpoint. I guess that goes back to never even contemplating like law school would have been an option, or that a professional degree, postgraduate degree wasn't even an option. Literally, I don't know if I mentioned I went to community college. So when I transferred to UW, this was only my second year at UW. So I was getting ready to graduate with a 4-year degree, 3 years out of high school. And I just wasn't even really prepared for that. So for that 3 years, the shortest time period I could think of to get the graduate degree, seemed smart. I didn't realize at the time that the debt would be, and that how compounded interest works. And look, I went through pre-calc, like I'm not a math idiot by any means, but I really didn't appreciate how much debt, and having over $200,000 in debt, even 15 years out of law school, is suffocating me, because I know that any money that I'm earning right now, I can't leave that. I can't invest that. I can't do anything until I get this weight off my back. And so, yeah, I look at the government and I'm like, why can't you absorb some of this for me so that this doesn't affect the next generation? And so law school was definitely my ticket out. But the reality is, like we were talking about, is that this American dream, this pull yourselves up from the bootstraps, getting ourselves out of poverty, has been the hardest thing, and maintaining that has been just as hard. So I graduated in 2007. I was barred in 2007. That was the housing crisis. I'm in LA. They want to pay us 50 grand a year, 60 grand a year in LA as a lawyer. My rent was $2,000 a month. You know what I mean? Like, we can't even live off that. And at that time now, I'm starting to have to take care of my mom, who's retired and is about to lose her house if I can't pay the mortgage. And where's she going to go? She's going to be homeless or living with another family member. So the reality is, you never really escape poverty, because you're ultimately, some way it's going to affect you. And just like my sister mentioned, even if it's like your teeth. So I've spent over $4,000 in college and law school just on root canals, because I grew up in poverty and had really bad health care. And these are realities that I know my counterparts didn't have to deal with. They didn't have to deal with the white guy making the blog. They didn't have to deal with health, dental issues like I did. They didn't have to pay for their mom's mortgage. They didn't have to worry about their mom working in the brothel. That was my reality in law school. And I still graduated and passed the bar in California on the first time. Wow. And when I came back here and got a job at a firm, I felt all the whiteness all over again. And the oppression of just having to work with white people who do not understand or appreciate, or refuse, I should say. They're willfully ignorant about their privilege and how white supremacy and generational wealth has benefited them, and how disconnected they are from so many segments of our society. And they don't expect somebody like me, who's in their office, to even know any of this, or be related to any of this, or have this kind of background. So their assumption is, right, that I'm some privileged light-skinned Black girl. And again, it's offensive, because you show up every day like, I don't know if I'm supposed to just play the imposter, prove myself, or flip the fuck out,
Well, I'm sure you code switching, like, what it is to like assume a different role when you're in different communities. And I think especially people who have engaged in different socioeconomic levels, we're really good at code switching, and we turn it off and we turn it on. And I know we always have this, like, when you're around your people, you can finally just be, and you can say the things that are comfortable, and you don't have to worry about if somebody's watching you, or you're gonna, show any signs of weakness or different from the norm.
That's a good point. Like, I always definitely felt, especially with professionals, and I think that I read recently this whole thing about like white people making racist jokes and things like that, and it's like they're all very much aware of their bias and their prejudice and the racism that they allow. They're aware of it, absolutely. I kind of forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry. But I do want to say, as far as being a lawyer, like, it's nothing like what I expected. I think I after the experience I had in law school, I thought that I needed to fit into some box. Like I needed to look a certain way and dress a certain way and wear my hair a certain way, take my nose ring out, which I'm not wearing. Obviously I gave up on the piercing thing, but I remember when I realized like, I can't be something other than me, or I'm not even going to be good at what I do. And I'm definitely not going to like what I do. So I put the piercing back in. I started, I just didn't care in terms of like, and I became, by being myself, I think I became more relatable, which made me enjoy my practice. I say this about attorneys, that there's definitely as many different types of attorneys as there are personalities. And so I also had to realize that, my audience or my client base may be different than your, some white, jock, a guy who became an attorney, what his client base looks like. And so I had to really find myself. There was a lot of mentors that I had, and in particular, some women attorneys who were really comfortable just being in their own skin, not necessarily Black women or anything like that. But just in terms of how they dressed and how they presented themselves and the way they spoke, and kind of using some of our, our femininity to our benefit when it comes to negotiations or dealing with opposing counsel, and really owning that. There's no issue with there being gender differences, but we definitely have a lot of prejudice and bias against women in our profession. And if you are aggressive, the names that come along with that. But it's definitely nothing like what I expected. I definitely thought I'd be making a whole lot more money, for sure. And that I would just be allowed to just like walk in and be given the privilege of being this lawyer, especially when I have, after working for 15 years, for people to actually respect my skill set and have confidence in my ability. I'm very candid about what I know and don't know. And so it's always surprising to me when I still get the clients or potential clients or opposing counsel who don't think I'm qualified, who don't think my opinions are valid. And I tend to, again, with the overcompensating, prove myself right a lot. So I'm really comfortable. I've been doing it a long time. So I think I'm finally, though, getting to the point in my practice where I can make it what I want. And that feels really good, because that imposter syndrome just stuck around way too long. It took me a while to really hone my own practice and figure out what kind of client base I want to represent. And I just feel like I'm privileged enough at this point with my own practice. I get to pick and choose. So I don't necessarily have to represent people that I don't like, or that don't like me. And that feels really good.
I think it's so important to be yourself and to tell your story, because I suffer also from imposter syndrome, because if we don't see people that come from where we've come from doing the things that we want to do, we will continue to feel like imposters. I never felt like I could be successful because of my trauma or my background or my upbringing, because I didn't see anyone like me doing it or hear anybody tell a story the same story that I had gone through. So I think it's so important for us to own our stories and our traumas and be okay with it and vocal about it, so that we can inspire these young people to see, I can do it. I don't have to be this cookie cutter, what I see in the movies or TV. I can have, a checkered past, or, a past that isn't, go to Yale or go to a, Ivy League school. So I think it's so important that you've owned your story and you share that. And it's so inspiring. And you really touched on all the different ways that systems were built specifically to oppress those less fortunate. The systems aren't broken. I think that they were built to be this way and hold those of us back who weren't born into a privileged life. And it's like you said, it's like trying to crawl your way out of it when the whole system is stacked against you at every step of the way.
Right.
So it can be discouraging when you think about, tearing down systems, and how do we change these systems when this is the way that they were meant to be. It feels like an overwhelming challenge, I guess.
It's a big challenge. And another thing you brought up is being soft and vulnerable as a woman of color. The people tell me that they're afraid of me, and I always ask, why are they afraid of me? It's because I am strong, and I say I'm very honest, sometimes brutally honest, and it makes people like, oh my God, what's wrong with her? And then growing up, my uncles called me Sergeant. And I would ask them, why are you referring to me that way? Oh, because you want to be in charge. It's because you're doing nothing. I have to do everything because you're doing nothing, right? So I became that person, and I actually took pride in it, because I thought, I'm not going to let them, control who I am, or I can be soft and vulnerable, but I also can be in charge. It's okay, but as women, we're not supposed to be like that, right? So I appreciate you bringing that up too.
Well, and in both of what you said too, I think there's like this, we have to let go of like the shame factor. And until you hear people tell their stories and talk about it, because 2 years ago, we weren't talking about this. It's maybe even a year ago. It's very recent, and part of it is, some of our story is not just our story, right? It's our mom's story. But it is our story.
We didn't speak publicly about this. There was, I think, we talked about more so the shame of how we grew up and not wanting to talk about it. It is only the last couple of years that we've been really transparent about, we grew up around pimps and prostitutes. Like, that is not a secret in our family anyway. And,
right.
Being able to, especially I think working with young people, and I had the opportunity in my career to work with a lot of times younger people. And I learned very quickly that they saw me as someone who didn't have bad experiences. And it was so important for me to be like, oh no, this is years of work here. This is not just, I was not born like this. This took years of learning and conditioning and changing and reaching into myself to figure out how I was raised wrong and assumed bad habits and assumed the role of even the colonizer sometimes. Like, this is what you see now is nothing compared to who I was at 18, 24, 28, even 30 and 35. We get to evolve. I tell young people all the time, like, you can't hurry it up. It's all about the experience. Like, you have to go through the experience, and it's hard and it's not always fun, but that's how you get to the other side. Like, you have to go through the experience. But it is very recent that we've been really vulnerable.
Well, we had to feel safe enough. And for a long time, we didn't live in the same city. I think that is another thing, is like, now that I'm back in Spokane, it's kind of the safety of, like, because we always had each other growing up. So now we have each other again. So talking about our story, it's like, I have the safety of knowing that she's there to support me regardless. And it's not that, and I think the reality is that once you open up and you realize that people did have maybe misperceptions, and now you can relate to more people and your voice is getting heard by more people, it's important to tell our stories. And that's a message I want to, I want the youth to really hear, because they have been silenced so much. We always are telling the kids, okay, not now, we don't want to hear it. But their stories, their personal stories and what they've went through are so important. And we got that generationally and culturally as well, as, you don't tell your family business, you don't put your dirt on the street, all that. And part of it is because, especially if it's illegal activity, right? Because the police might come in and hurt somebody, or, you don't want to be a snitch. You don't want to be outcast in your own society, right? In your own community. And so it's a conditioning, right? And it's conditioned to the point where we don't even necessarily tell our own trauma and our own stories. And while we don't have to encourage people to snitch necessarily, especially when you don't necessarily always know what's going on to make that call. But to tell your trauma and to be able to tell your story and support that, because it's really, really important in my opinion. But getting to that place where you feel safe enough to do it, I appreciate how difficult that is, and how most people never get there or don't have that. So to have that, at this age it's refreshing. And I want my kids obviously to feel like they have a safe space to be able to tell their stories.
Absolutely. And we are raising our children in a vastly different environment that we grew up in. And I think this is probably a lot of true, especially with first generation immigrants. You realize, like, your children are losing what we experience. Like, they look at Nana so differently than we look at Nana.
They love our mom. They're like, really?
She high. But we have to share with them, like, especially my children, like, no, you guys don't get it. Like, your life is so good. Like, and I definitely feel this, like, sympathy with first generation parents and what their kids kind of lose, because you get to give them a better life. And as great as that is, me and Natasha will both say that, we're not mad at our mom for our experiences, because we got an amazing education from that. And we were lucky enough that she protected us in some capacity. And at the same time, she was brutally honest, that gave us this window into reality that so many people would never understand. They wouldn't understand, the sex industry or drug dealing in the capacity that we understand it, or the capacity we see it as a valid way to survive if that's what you need to do.
Or they grow up in this facade that everything is great and you can go to Nordstrom's and buy your jeans, and and then they become an adult and they're like, oh, what the hell do we do now?
Right.
And that's a lot what's happening in the world too, or in America, is because we grew up so hard. Parents now, I just want to give my kid everything I didn't have. But there's no tools there. There has to be tools to get out into that hard world, because the world is still hard.
It's very hard.
Yeah.
And they do. I'm not a coddling parent. Definitely want them to skim their knees.
Yes, you're a great parent. I'm sure, Natasha, you are too. And we
Yes.
appreciate you
Yeah,
ladies taking the
thank
time
you.
for our sister talk.
Yeah, thank you so much. We could talk to
This
you
is
again. Like
awesome.
last time we told Lacrecia we could talk all day. But we want to end with the same question. We asked Lacrecia last time if there was one resource you would want people to go out and check out, or something you would want people to do. Last time she said Black Lives Matter. Is there, we're a month later, we're making progress. Things are slowly, hopefully changing. What is the next step? What are the next things that we can all be doing? Is it getting involved in our local community, or what to keep the momentum going? Because I think that as summer comes along, people are going to start to maybe go back to normal life, and these things are going to start to fall off. So what can we do? What are some action items we can take to keep moving forward?
I would say, and to tie it back into the beginning, right, is I would definitely encourage people to join a nonprofit organization that fits in line with the agenda of the Black Lives Matter movement. So whether that's NAACP or some other nonprofit in your community, I think that's where it starts. Another thing is that in order for the work to be done, there needs to be resources, right? So if you have resources, whether that's a skill set or financial resources that you can utilize in order to help these organizations in order to move forward policy changes, I think that's a great place to start. Being willing to do the small things like pick up the phone or send an email in order to support or object against some kind of, for example, we have this killology training thing going on, right? And so we don't want the sheriff's department to participate in that. And we have had a lot of people in the community willing to, speak out. And so figuring out what you can do individually and knowing that collectively is going to make a difference. And then getting out in the organizations, I think what we all need is that motivation and to know that, and a lot of this stuff is done virtually. So I don't mean get out and put yourself in any kind of health risk, but be informed. Right now, the internet, as much of a tool as it is, can be your friend as far as helping you get informed and finding things that you can do virtually from the safety and comfort of your own home that really can make change. I think a friend of ours, Latrice Williams, said it best that, people are always saying something along the lines of, like, oh, all this fuss, all these protests, what is this really going to do? But it's already doing stuff, right? We're already having these conversations. It's already making change. People are reading books and reading informations and engaging with people in their community or their family like they haven't before. And whether that's creating division or bringing people closer together, it's making a change. It's actually doing something. And so all these little things that we can do, they really matter. And I think people really got to focus on that positive of what can you do? Because it matters. And it matters because you matter. It matters because we matter. It matters because people matter, not property, people.
And, I have more advice too. I would say, look at your circle. Look at the people that you are close to and ask yourself, is it diverse in class? Is it diverse in race and ethnicity? And if it's not, go listen to people who are different than you. And you can't always take, a brown person who grew up like you. Dig a little deeper. You really need to get out there and have that conversation. I think, I'm seeing a lot of white people are really defensive about what they believe our system is. And I think that you got to have a conversation and make friends with people. If you go to a predominantly white church, go to a Black church. And then join those boards. Those nonprofit as a professional, and I know that you do a lot of business with professionals, the best way to network is get on a board. You will meet so many people. You will have access to I've gotten so many referrals and business information from the boards or the people on those boards that we engage with. They're a wealth of resources, not just to you, but to your whole community. And that's where you're able to leverage your fiscal opportunities and your social and professional opportunities. So, it benefits both people or both entities. It's not one-sided. And, it's the way to get your brand out there, get your business out there, and do the right thing. And then look at your businesses. If your business does not have diversity within its ranks, reassess. Start hiring people in from those marginalized groups in positions of power. You have to start doing that. And once we start doing that and start really looking at the way that we hire, the way that we engage with the world around us, the people that we surround ourselves with, that starts to change things.
Mm-hmm.